Today we're going to be talking about GDP that was just released this morning, actual job numbers, not the labor force survey that was released this week, and retail sales, how they all tie together and how they affect you. So first things first, GDP was just released 30 minutes ago, and the news is going to go crazy with GDP was up in July, 0.2%. The economy is doing great. Every liberal talking head is going to be on the news saying how this is carny working, and it is good. It is better than being down. Is it fantastic? No. Now, good news for our friends in Alberta. The majority of the GDP growth was in mining and oil extraction. So thank you, Alberta, for boosting the country yet again. This is really good news. The biggest thing drawing down GDP happened to be retail. Now, we're going to come back to retail and why retail matters so much in these times that we're working on. But for now, GDP is not negative. And if we can continue this, the Liberals will get to say that there was never a recession. Because, as I've said before, you technically need 2 negative quarters of GDP to call it a recession. We have 1. Let's see what August brings about when those numbers roll in next month. So, moving on to jobs. So, I had discussed this in June, I think. There's the labor force survey, which is a phone survey of X number of people in these 5 or 6 postal codes. It is not, these are the actual facts. So my last video on jobs, that was about the labor force survey. This week we get the actual numbers, which are the payroll numbers. So this is where we find out how many people are actually employed, how much payroll went up or down. We find out how many people are on unemployment, especially compared to a year prior. And we find out how many jobs are open at the moment in Canada. So all of this data goes back to July. So the labor force survey is faster and we get that data much faster out to us, but the payroll number stuff is the actual meat of it. Labor force survey is just an idea. This is what we think it's going to be. So nothing really different stood out in the payroll numbers from the labor force survey for July. And I was really quite surprised by it. The only thing was that unemployment insurance recipients, so people who are getting unemployment insurance, that went up 9.4% year over year in July. And that's a huge number. Now, it went up 9.4%. It's 124,000 and a couple of hundred people who were applied for EI in July. It doesn't sound like a big number, but when you look at the year over year, that's where you start to get an idea of how things are going. So that stood out to me as something that we didn't really talk about. In the unemployment is at 7.1%. You don't see that it's almost 10% higher year over year. And that's a big jump. That's 124,000 people who are now scraping by because, as we all know, EI is not remotely close to someone's salary. Within the payroll statistics, though, there was talk of how many job vacancies there are. So how many jobs are actually open in the country right now. And it turns out that there is the highest number of unemployed people to job vacancy since 2017 in Canada. There are 3.3 unemployed. So this is unemployed but looking. So this isn't your stay-at-home parents. This isn't your retirees or your teenagers. This is unemployed people. people who have lost their job in the last 18 months looking for work. There are 3.3 people for every one job listing. And please remember in that, asylum seekers, people here on student work permits, they don't count towards that 3.3. So your guess is as good as mine as to how many people in Canada are actually fighting for every one job. But we do know that it is the highest it has been since 2017. And it's coming close to pandemic level. And that's really a dangerous place for us to all be. Now, back to retail sales. So retail sales dragged down the GDP and was the number one driver of it going not as high as it could have been. So retail sales in July decreased by 0.8% or $69.6 billion in July. The hardest hit areas were motor vehicle sales and motor vehicle parts dealers, as well as fuel vendors. This all together is a bigger problem than headlines lead you to believe. So GDP is up, yay, says one team, boo, says the other, right? Payroll, nobody really talks about, but they're going to say, yay, look, there aren't that many unemployed people, or health and sciences grew by this much. Average wages are up 3.4%. Good. Those are good news. That's what you're going to hear. And you aren't going to hear about the job vacancies and how many unemployed people there are per job. Now, it all ties into retail. And the biggest key that shows that Canadians can't do it anymore is those auto parts. It's a strange thing, right? Like, why would I say that auto parts are a big driver of, a big driving sign, I should say, as to how Canadians are actually doing financially? Well, you expect your auto parts and service sales to be relatively steady. If you have a giant hike, a giant jump in new car sales, then your parts sales might be down that month, that quarter, that kind of thing. When both are down, that means that people can't afford to do what they have to do. It's really that simple. You aren't going for an oil change, getting your brake pads done, getting a new set of tires, any of that, if you can't put food on the table. Those are necessities. And back to what we spoke about a couple of weeks ago now, where we're seeing in people's families, in the numbers, that Canadians cannot make ends meet, that they cannot pay their credit card bills, that cars are being repossessed at a highest level ever in Canada. That combined with lower parts sales and lower new vehicle sales and lower used vehicle sales, that signals that the problem is a lot bigger than anybody would lead us to believe. Now, I don't care which party you vote for, but if you are 100% honest with yourself, you would have to agree that nobody is bringing up the actual issues. They're all sort of pussyfooting around it. The Liberals, we made this cheaper. The Conservatives, well, we need this grocery item cheaper, or we need this done. But nobody's talking about how we have signal after signal after signal. The Canadian families are not okay. From the newspaper article coming out this week saying that seniors can't afford food and are some of the largest groups using food banks, to now this, that people are not repairing their cars anymore. Things have to get better at some point. This never goes on forever, and this will not be different. This will end. This hardship will end. Good times will rebound. But I don't have a magic ball to say when that is. Until that happens, if you need help getting control of your situation, please go to my website. It's linked below in the comments and the description. And I have free tools and paid tools that might be able to help you make a difference in your life. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for watching.